Welcome to the Oklahoma Memo. My name is Ryan Welton, the founder and curator of Oklahoma Memo, your daily local news recap here in the state of Oklahoma, focused on Oklahoma headlines. Not only, we do have some national headlines, but it's really mostly focused on local news from the day before to keep you connected, not to rumor and innuendo and social media, but to actual vetted journalism. This morning, got the coffee in the Local Media Association cup. I do some work for them. It says, fueled by a free press. Today's flavor is French vanilla. Let's talk about what I think is going to be the big headline of the week besides Christmas. Hopefully you have your shopping done. Hopefully you're set for the week. If not, you better get on it. You're going to have good weather, and that leads me into what I think is going to be the big deal of the week. And it's spring in winter, the first week of winter, and we're going to have highs in the lower to mid to even upper 70s in some places. I expect that there may be places in Oklahoma that hit 80 this week. Kind of crazy, but with that brings higher winds and a wildfire danger. We've had this type of weather before. I remember when I worked at KOCO, in fact, my first year there, on New Year's Eve, we had wildfires in Oklahoma City. It was weather just like this. So I would just say, be careful with what you're doing, and just keep an eye out for breaking news if that, were to actually happen. Hopefully it doesn't. There have been some small wildfires in different places, but really not many. Otherwise, this is going to be no coat weather this week. I mean, mid 70s. If you do have shopping to do, it's going to be quite comfortable. All right, national headlines. The United States is still in pursuit of a tanker off the coast of Venezuela. That's in the news. The Epstein files were released partially. Congress told them to release all of them. The DOJ, President Trump's administration, released some of them. There was a big Turning Point USA gathering last night. A lot of headlines from that between Erica Kirk and Vice President J.D. Vance and Nicki Minaj. There you have it. But we don't focus on that. We focus mostly on Oklahoma. And the big story that I have in here today comes from Oklahoma Voice, as it often does. And it is forward-looking to the legislative season 2026, that the governor and state leaders will have a little bit less money to work with. Barbara Hobarak, her lead, the state will have $692 million less to spend in crafting a budget for the next fiscal year, a state panel was told on Friday. Now, it turns out that the news isn't all bad, and the governor is largely pleased about this. Let me continue. The state will have about $12 billion to spend in all, or a drop of about 5.6%, according to figures released during the Board of Equalization meeting. What a great name for a board, the Board of Equalization. Stitt chairs that board, and he says the reduction in money here was attributable to a smaller amount in available cash to spend. But he said with recent tax cuts and the creation of additional tax credits, revenue is still going up, and for that, quote, he was very, very pleased where we are at. So, it's hard to reconcile less money available for government services, less money available for the state government budget, and to be something that we can be not necessarily excited about, but pleased about. So let's just go to the story itself and dig in here to see if we can't find a little bit more. Total recurring revenue is up to about $338 million, or 3.2% compared to fiscal year 2026. Governor Stitt has championed reducing the state's income tax and the elimination of the state sales tax on groceries, something lawmakers approved. He said every time he cuts taxes, critics say the sky is falling, but he says revenue keeps going up. Okay, that's good, I guess. I think there's a lot of catching up that Oklahoma has to do in a number of areas that require funding, but that's where we're at for the budget next year. So let me ask you, what are you most concerned about with regard to spending? I mean, in here it says the state agencies have asked for more than $1.5 billion in new funding. And that apparently is very unrealistic. That's according to Senate Appropriations Chair Chuck Hall. So you have social services, state agencies, not all social services, I suppose, asking for $1.5 billion, and it doesn't look like we actually have that money. Governor Stitt says he'll be advocating for mostly flat agency budgets when lawmakers return to the Capitol in February. I certainly always am looking for lower taxes, Stitt said. I don't have any specific things right now, but we're still working through our agenda is going to be. The state rainy day fund has more than $1.3 billion in savings, while the revenue stabilization fund has nearly $449 million. It sounds to me like Governor Stitt is looking to leave a legacy that has those coffers filled. In the meantime, you have things like the mental health agency, the tourism department that's going to want to get off on good footing with its new director. You're going to have a lot of agencies that need some money here. So, and the cost of everything continues to go up. So that will be a very interesting discussion as we get into 2026. Again, I'd be interested in hearing what your concerns are with regard to budget, if anything specific. Excuse me. The other big story in the memo this morning comes from, and I usually have two or three, comes from the Frontier. The Frontier always does fantastic work. And in this case, the headline is, after food aid vanished, remember, SNAP, when the federal government was down, SNAP went away for just a little bit. And when food aid vanished, calls for rent help surged and some faced eviction. I got to tell you, I don't know that I would ever want to be a landlord. It sounds great to buy and own property and to get recurring revenue from renters. However, what a pickle you're in if somebody can't afford to pay their rent. What do you do in that case? This story from Maddie Keys on the housing beat for the Frontier is truly an important one. The lead: on the first Monday after December 1st, rent payments were due. The phone lines at the Oklahoma City nonprofit Neighborhood Services Organization started ringing off the hook. Hundreds of people called within a 2-hour period for rental assistance that day alone, and thousands called in November. But here's the key line. Landlords started filing evictions against tenants as early as December 8th. Really? 1 week? You gave them 1 week? 1 week. I get it. The rent is due on December 1st, but you're going to kick a family? That's the conundrum. I get it from a landlord's perspective, but I don't get it from a human perspective. It's an important story from Maddie Keys. I hope you'll go out there and read that. The third position on Oklahoma Memo, I left for Grant Herms and myself. We get together usually remotely to talk on Fridays. I usually have that in the Saturday edition of Oklahoma Memo. However, we got to meet in person this week, and that combined with Oklahoma, Alabama playing that night and having some family over, and I kind of ran out of time to get that posted in time for Saturday. But more than that, I ran out of space on my Mac. And so I've spent way more time than you would ever imagine getting files off to a hard drive. And that's just poor file management on my part. So I know you don't care about that, but I kind of was an idiot in terms of managing that. And that caused me to only be able to put Grant's conversation in there today. It's still pretty timely. We talked before the partial Epstein files were released. We talked about Susie Wiles's interview in Vanity Fair and what that tells us about the president. We talked about the president's decision to, and he didn't order the Kennedy Center to be renamed. The Kennedy Center board, he put all the people on that board that decided this. They decided to rename the Kennedy Center to the Trump Kennedy Center. I think that's very temporary. And then he signed that into action, and then he reclassified marijuana from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, which will allow for more research on the medical front. So it was a very active week, and Grant has this Substack and a podcast called Make It Make Sense with Grant Herms. And I always emphasize that last part because there are lots of podcasts called Make It Make Sense. But his is the only called Make It Make Sense with Grant Herms. So we talked about all those things. That interview is in Oklahoma Memo on This Fine Money. And then we have just our regular batch of national links, including some pertaining to the Epstein files. And then we get to the Turning Point drama. There's apparently Turning Point USA drama. There's long been drama. I say long. This year, 2025, there has been drama brewing in the conservative content ecosystem. J.D. Vance telling the Turning Point crowd, according to MSNBC, MS now, he said, "You don't have to apologize for being white anymore." I get it, and you don't, but kind of a dog whistle. CBS pulled a 60-minute segment last night concerning for local news. Ever since Barry Weiss took over, we journalists felt some trepidation about her leadership and what that would mean. And it turns out that they pulled a package that probably was something that President Trump wasn't going to like. Was it because he wasn't going to like it? It was about Venezuela. A correspondent calls the decision political, and I've got a story linked up from the Wall Street Journal. So I don't watch CBS News, not nationally. Locally, of course, I love, I spend a lot of time with Newsnight and News on 6. I watch them, but not the national news. And then some sad news. Actor James Ransone. I wasn't really familiar with his work, as I haven't watched The Wire, and I know that's sacrilege. I need to watch The Wire. Died by suicide at 46. Very sad. Very, very, very sad. All right. The Oklahoma Rundown's got a bunch of local links, not as many usually on a Monday because there's not that much original reporting happening on Saturdays. But at the very top, I do have a list of, and I don't have the list, Tulsa Flyer has the list. Tulsa restaurants that are open for Christmas and Christmas Eve. So if you don't want to cook and you want to have an idea of who's open in the Tulsa area, check that out. Good news for Tinker. And I knew that this was coming down the pipeline. I talked to James Lankford's, one of his spokespersons, Storm Jones, a friend of mine, that the defense bill passes Congress, increasing military pay and protecting Oklahoma bases. That's at least partly thanks to Senator Lankford and his work. That story from News on 6. The Tulsa World with the story about President Trump's new immigration restrictions hitting Tulsa hard, with an expert saying it's terrifying. And then a great story from Oklahoma Voice. This is from my old neck of the woods, the Muskogee area, how this small Oklahoma school district became one of the state's top performers. I don't want to give away what the small town is. I want you to go to Oklahoma Voice and find that out. But they have a wonderful, wonderful story to tell. That in today's Oklahoma Memo. It'll take you right to Oklahoma Voice. And then one more I want to tell you about from K News Cow. K News Cow does a really good job in northern Oklahoma. And this story is about a judge being recused from a case involving a former school superintendent in the school district of Peckham, Peckham. That has long been a story. The folks up there know what that's all about. So you might want to go check that out if you're familiar with that case. I've talked on long enough. I hope you have a great Christmas week ahead. I'm going to try to do this every day best I can. I appreciate you listening and subscribing to Oklahoma Memo at oklahomamemo.com/subscribe.